What we know is that Drew Brees signed a 2-year contract that is basically a 1-year deal that can be voided after year one. It's a 2-year contract designed to be able to spread out the cap hit over multiple seasons. And if Drew Brees is on the roster next year, cool. And if not, they've structured it to where they're going to be okay under the salary cap. So you know Drew Brees is going to be on the roster. What we also know is that Taysom Hill was going to be on the roster one way or another. The Saints exercised their restricted free agent tender with Taysom Hill. They put a first-round tender on him. No team offered a contract, which meant the Saints could have Taysom Hill under contract at $4.6 million, a first-round tender for Taysom Hill. But the Saints instead elected to do something right, to do right by their player, which we'll delve into a little deeper here. They signed Taysom Hill to a new deal when they had no obligation to do so. What we also know is that Sean Payton has said all along that the Saints were going to add a third quarterback because they want to keep Taysom Hill in that slash role, that versatile role where he can do so many things like he did in the playoff game against the Vikings. He threw a 50-yard pass. He had 50 rushing yards. He caught a touchdown pass. He could block. He just play special teams. They want him in that role. But it's also impractical to only have 2 quarterbacks on your roster when one of them is consistently putting himself at risk. You have to have another option at quarterback on your roster, which is why a year ago, Teddy Bridgewater was on the roster at $7.2 million. One season, $7.2 million, and the Saints maximized that because Teddy started 5 games and went 5-0 in that stretch. So we knew Brees would be there, Taysom Hill would be there in his slash role, and they're going to add a veteran backup to be in the Teddy Bridgewater role. A month ago, I told you my feeling was that should be Jameis Winston because no team was going to invest market value in Jameis Winston at this point. And what he needed to do was essentially what Teddy Bridgewater did. Rehab your image, sit, watch, learn, and next year, when the quarterback carousel spins again, and you could very well have Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers all retire, and then other spots come available just because of poor play or whatever it may be, teams moving on, then maybe you take your shot at becoming a starter again. But there's no team in the NFL this offseason that was going to invest market value into Jameis Winston to make him a franchise quarterback. So the Saints did a very smart thing, something we talked about a month ago. They added a guy with 70 career starts, who's one of 8 quarterbacks in the history of the league to throw for 5,000 yards, who's in his physical prime at only 26 years old, who knows the division, knows your personnel, knows intimately a team you're going to play twice next year. It's a win-win-win-win-win-win-win, and you're going to do it at a super affordable price at $3.5 million. So then you've got Brees, you've got Jameis in your Bridgewater role, and you've got Taysom in his role that he was in a year ago. So why draft Tommy Stevens? That's the big question. Well, Sean Payton, after the draft, explained the Tommy Stevens pick on a Zoom call with the local media.
You know, we kind of followed throughout the full draft process. You know, of course, you guys know kind of his story relative to transferring into Mississippi State. We've seen him at quarterback, and we've also seen him do a number of different things, you know, kind of in that F tight end role. We think he's a real good athlete, and we kind of have a vision that'll start with quarterback, but a little bit much like Taysom's.
They essentially drafted the potential Taysom Hill replacement, and all they needed to do was use a 7th-round flyer on him. Think of it this way. Taysom Hill, Drew Brees, Jameis Winston. Those are your 3 quarterbacks on the roster for 2020. There is no franchise that is going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the active roster. None. It's a super rare situation to have 3. The Saints did this once before when they had Garrett Grayson, and they didn't want to put him on the practice squad because if you have a player on the practice squad, any team in the NFL can sign your players off the practice squad, but they have to sign into the active roster. The Saints didn't want to put a 3rd-round draft pick in Garrett Grayson at risk of being signed and losing that asset, so they kept 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. You don't keep guys on the active roster generally that aren't going to contribute because roster spots are so valuable on game days. So a third quarterback is an outlier. 4 is completely unheard of. So what the Saints are likely going to do with Tommy Stevens this year is stash him on the practice squad because nobody, not a single team in the NFL, is going to sign Tommy Stevens off the Saints practice squad to their active roster because nobody's going to make him their backup quarterback, and nobody knows his value if it is in a Taysom Hill role yet. So the Saints can effectively stash Tommy Stevens on the practice squad for 2020. And when 2021 rolls around, there's going to be moving parts again. Maybe Jameis leaves in free agency. Maybe Breeze retires. Maybe Taysom Hill leaves in free agency. There's a lot, well, not in free agency. Maybe the Saints move on from Taysom Hill and give him the opportunity to go sign somewhere else. There's a lot of options that could happen at the end of the 2020 season. And this leaves a lot of those options open. Specifically with Taysom Hill, the Saints owed Taysom Hill $4.641 million. That was his tender. That's all they owed him. The Saints could have said, sorry, Taysom, I don't care if you want a new deal. This is what you're worth based on the NFL salary structure. We put a first-round tender on you. You are a restricted free agent. This is what you make. That's it. After this year, you become an unrestricted free agent. Do whatever you want. Sign wherever you want. But they didn't do that. They looked at a player who's brought immense value to them, who they want to do right by, and they signed him to a $21 million contract. Now, the Saints, who are wizards at this, structured this deal in a brilliant way. It's basically what they do. The deal is structured to where, essentially, Taysom Hill got a $16.3 million contract with $16 million of it guaranteed. So, in essence, they paid him that $16 million up front. And $4.6 million of it is in salary. So that's all that's going to count against the cap this year for New Orleans. So they're essentially paying Taysom Hill. As far as the salary cap, Taysom Hill's number is the same this year, even with his new deal, as it would have been if he were under the first round tender. So it's still just going to be a base of $4.6 million with a cap hit of $4.641 million. So the Saints salary cap this year looks no different, but they were able to pay Taysom Hill $16 million to do right by a guy that's done very well for them. If you've been watching The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, and I'm only using this, it's an old example, but I'm only using it because it's something that's fresh in everybody's minds. There was the episode where Scottie Pippen was unhappy with his contract. Scottie Pippen signed a long-term contract. The Bulls had absolutely no obligation to tear up that contract and give him a new deal, despite the fact that he had outplayed it. And so they carried on with a 7-year deal where Pippen made far less than what he was worth. But they said, you signed a deal. This is what it is. And what they did ultimately was they ticked off one of the best players in the league and created a lot of bad will, a lot of ill will. The Saints, in doing this, are doing something they're not obligated to do, but are creating a lot of goodwill, not only with Taysom Hill, but with their organization. That's what good ownership does. You reward, in any line of work, you reward people who do well. If someone's outworking their contract, what you're compensating them, you give them a raise. That's essentially what the Saints did. They gave Taysom Hill a raise. So that's fantastic. They could have strong-armed him, said, hey, you're a restricted free agent. This is what you get. But they know he's worth more. They gave him more. So I like how it's structured. With nothing guaranteed for 2021, you go into next season, the 2021 season, with a lot of options open. Maybe Drew Brees returns. I don't think that's the case. But maybe he does. And then Jameis Winston moves on in free agency. Or re-signs the backup. And Taysom Hill moves on. Or re-signs in his current role. Or remains under contract, the air quotes 2-year deal that he signed, which is really 1 year. Because of the way they structured it. Maybe in 2021, Brees is retired and you open up the competition to Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill to see who's going to be the starter. I certainly don't think you just hand the job to Taysom Hill, but you can give him an opportunity to try to win it. And maybe he doesn't want that. And so he moves on. And then Tommy Stevens becomes your Taysom Hill role. And Jameis becomes your starter. Or you draft a quarterback. Or you go find another one in free agency. Or whatever the case may be. But what you've done here is very smart. You've kept your salary cap in order. You've got your Hall of Fame starter. You've got your proven veteran, young veteran number 2. You've got Taysom Hill, who can still operate in his current role. And if something happens to Drew, you have the conversation about what you do. And you've structured all of this financially to where it's not going to crush you this year, and you've left your options wide open for 2021. If Breeze wants to return or if he wants to retire, your options are wide open with Jameis and Taysom with basically a clean slate. I think it's brilliant what they've done. And you've even given yourself a far distant insurance policy with the likelihood of Tommy Stevens being in the Taysom role if Taysom Hill moves on after this year. So it's a lot of moving parts. It took a lot of forethought and a lot of work, not only to get everyone on board with this plan, but to structure it financially to make it work with all 4 guys. But they've done it because the Saints are a really good organization. That can't be said for the Saints throughout their entire history. But right now, not only are the Saints at the peak of their entire organization on the field, but as far as management and how the operation is run, it's never been better. And this is further proof of it.